It's time to let in yet another new year, so Happy New Year! But if you are going out to celebrate and you're going out for a drink and you're going in your car, please heed this as a warning. First and foremost, you should absolutely not be driving if you've had a drink. However small amount of drink you think you've had, you might be unfit to drive through drink. Now that's not the same as being over the limit to drink, because you might be unfit without being over the limit and you might still be charged and you might still be convicted of drink driving, as in being unfit to drive through drink or drugs. So however much you think you can handle and still drive without being over the limit necessarily, please do take that as a warning. I would urge you all to not drive if you've had any amount of drink whatsoever. That said, if you are questioned by the police and you have had one small drink and you think you are under the limit and you think you are still fit to drive, then there are one or two questions the police might pose to you which would give them a valid reason to breathalyze you at the roadside. Now, if you've watched my channel for any length of time, you'll know that the police can pull over any vehicle at random without any reason whatsoever. But what they can't do without any reason whatsoever is breathalyze you. But if they have any reason whatsoever, then they can breathalyze you, even if it's a preliminary breath test, just to determine whether or not you are over the legal limit to drive. Now, one of the ways they might do this is to ask where you've been, or where you're going, or whether you've had a drink this evening. It's a very common question because my answer to that, if I'm driving, is always no, I haven't had a drink whatsoever. Or if I have been to a party, I've been to a party, but I haven't had any drink whatsoever. There are two reasons for that. One is I won't drink and drive. I won't drive if I've had any drink whatsoever. But the second reason I might not volunteer information that I had a drink, if that were the case, would be because that would give the officer a reasonable excuse or reasonable suspicion that I'd been drinking and unfit to drive through drink, and therefore an excuse to breathalyze me. Now I reiterate, I would not drive if I've had any drink, and I would urge everybody watching not to drive if you've had any drink. But if you were to say that you've had one small glass of wine or whatever it might be, that is enough for the police officer to breathalyze you, even though you had no obligation to answer any questions from a police officer whatsoever. They have to form their own suspicion, and you don't have to answer any questions even if you're under caution. If you're being asked specific questions that might relate to an offence, it should be under caution. But even then you're not compelled to answer those questions, at least not unless you've had access to legal advice, which you're entitled to do so if you're being questioned formally in respect of a suspected offence. Now for most of you this will be perfectly fine because you won't be driving if you've had any kind of drink. But even if you've had one small drink and you are under the legal limit, but you've had that drink nonetheless and the police officer asks you whether you've had any drinks this evening and you say yes, they might well breathalyze you, and even if that's a negative breath test, they might still decide to prosecute you on the basis that they believe you're unfit to drive through drink, even though you might be under the legal limit. Now, to avoid this, you could simply not answer the police officer's questions. You are not compelled to do so, at least not unless you're under caution, you've had legal advice, and you choose to answer those questions. But even in that scenario, it is still your choice as to what you say in response to those questions and how you answer those questions. If instead you simply ask the police officer whether or not you're being detained for any reason, and the police officer says no because there isn't any reason to detain you, but of course remember, if you have been driving dangerously or erratically, that will then have to be the officer's only reason and suspicion to breathalyze you on the reasonable suspicion that you've had some kind of drink. But in that case, the evidence will have to be the officer's assessment of your driving beforehand that formed the suspicion that allowed them to do the breath test in the first place. Whereas if you volunteer the information that you've had a glass of wine, that would be enough for the officer to breathalyze you in that instance. Now I make this video because I know that lots of you believe that the police will bend the rules slightly in order to get a conviction against you, even if you're not really unfit to drive through drink and you are under the limit, but this would give them the perfect excuse to do so. So as I said, and I reiterate, you should not drive if you've had any drink whatsoever. Your insurance might be void for one, but you also risk being prosecuted for being unfit to drive through drink, regardless of being under the legal limit. But of course, if you volunteer up information, that's going to make it even easier for the police to do so. So I hope you found that useful, but please do me the favor of subscribing to my channel, because I found out recently that 60% of you that watch this channel are not subscribed, and I'd really love for you to do so. Please also check out my brand new podcast on Spotify, linked in the description below. And over there, I hope to answer lots more of your questions in podcast format. In the meantime, Happy New Year and thank you for watching.